Chapter 11. A tale as old as time. Sorry, I had to put in there. That's literally the title. To Gaston's horror, he was seated between Cersei's ludicrous sisters. He came to learn their names were Lucinda, Ruby, and Martha, though which was which he didn't know. The dinner went on for ages as Lumiere introduced course after course, enough food that even Gaston was near the point of bursting. Every so often he would see Lumiere glancing over at him, as if he felt bad for Gaston's unfortunate place at the table. Gaston couldn't wait to go downstairs and tell them the rumors about Cersei's sisters were true. How strange this must be for you in the dining hall, among people you once served, said one of the ghastly-looking sisters. It was true. It was odd to be there with the king and queen, and even with Kingsley in this setting. It was all so formal, with the large floral arrangements and candles everywhere, with Cogsworth and all of his footmen lined up, standing at attention and waiting to see if any of the guests needed the slightest thing. It's even more uncomfortable, I think, to be served by people I consider to be my friends, he said. Speaking of friends, how sad you must be. The prince hasn't said a word to you all evening. I don't think he's even looked in your direction during dinner, said the witch on his left. That was true, but Kingsley did smile at him when they were in the drawing room, and that was all Gaston needed. He knew in his heart his friend was happy to see him again. Yes, I wonder if Cersei hasn't poisoned him against you, said the witch to his right, who clearly didn't mind breaking the rules of etiquette. One of the things Francis had imparted to Gaston during his crash course in court etiquette while helping him dress was that it was improper to talk across the table during formal dinner parties. Guests were expected to take their cue with the queen. If she was talking to the person to her left, then so did everyone else at the table. And once she switched to speaking to the person on her right, everyone followed suit. Which meant, to Gaston's dismay, he spent the entire meal only speaking to Cersei's frightful sisters. Come now, I would think coming from a family such as yours, so old and so well respected, that you would know how dinners like this worked, said Gaston, happy with himself that he remembered Francis's lesson. Are you scolding us, Gaston? Are you such the gentleman now that you would comment on our lack of decorum? Said the witch to his right. Not at all, my lady. I was simply giving a reasonable explanation as to why the prince hadn't yet spoken to me this evening. He wondered when this wretched dinner would end and he would be released from this torment. For it was clear that that is what these women were doing, tormenting him, and taking far too much delight in doing so. When the witches weren't whispering to each other, they were chatting away at him, needling and prying, and laughing shrilly in his ears. But the witch was correct. Kingsley didn't look at him once throughout the entire meal, and he wondered if the skeletal-looking witches in wigs, with far too much makeup on their faces, were correct that the accursed Cersei had been filling Kingsley's head with lies about him too. Maybe she had already told Kingsley he needed to send him away. One of the things he remembered from the stories of his childhood was that witches rarely, if ever, told the truth. So in all likelihood, Cersei was probably lying. But what did that mean for her sisters? Were they lying too? Or was this one of those rare occasions where they told the truth? He wasn't sure what to think, except that believing Cersei's sisters made it easier to plot against her. As he sat there through endless courses and bewildering conversation, he wondered how these could be Cersei's actual sisters. He thought they were frightful when he first saw them in the garden. But now, in the dining room with the candles blazing, he was faced with their true horror. Their faces were painted white, caked so thickly They looked as though they never washed them and just applied the makeup layer over layer, creating a cracked effect. That they looked like weathered glaze on a neglected doll's face. And it was alarming how thin they were, like skeletons, all bones, skins, eyes, and elaborate hairdos, with feathers that kept swishing across his face when they turned their heads. Lumiere kept giggling to himself when he saw Gaston batting the feathers out of his face, or dodging a pointy elbow while trying to eat his soup. Gaston would laugh about it too, if only he weren't so miserable. Perhaps he would laugh when he told the tale to his friends downstairs. I imagine your friends Lumiere and Francis, and perhaps even Mr. Cogsworth, will have already told them the story before you see them next, said one of the witches. Gaston was abashed, forgetting the witches could hear his thoughts. It had been clear since the moment he met them. It wasn't as if he had been in the company of many witches that he knew of at any rate, but he knew enough about them from the book of fairy tales, and he was becoming increasingly convinced these might very well be the witches from those tales. Indeed, they seemed to resemble the witches from Snow White's story, the very witches who led her stepmother Grimhilda down the path of darkness and ruin. Nevertheless, he was embarrassed. It was one thing thinking something rude, even if it was true. It was another having your secret thoughts shared without intention. He didn't know quite what to say except to make his apology. I beg your pardon. We know people make fun of us, Gaston. We make fun of all of you, too, said the witch to his left. I suppose we're all even then, he said, looking over at Kingsley and Circe. It was the first time he let his gaze linger upon them, and he wished he hadn't. His friend seemed very much in love with her, giving her kisses and feeding her little sweets off his own plate. We're not sure that's true, said one of the witches, taking his attention away from the happy couple. At first he thought she was remarking on how he said they were even, but then he realized she was reading his thoughts again. You don't think he loves her? Can't she read minds like you do? He asked under his breath, so no one else would hear. Not when it's important, one of them hissed. Not when she needs it most, said another. Not when she's being stubborn, they said together, much more loudly than he expected. I see, he said, looking around to see if everyone was looking at them. They had only gotten the attention of Mr. Cogsworth, which surprised him, and it was likely because the major domo was always on constant alert. That was one of his jobs, to see things others did not. But everyone else at the table seemed to be too engrossed in their own conversations to notice. Without realizing it, one of the sisters started talking again. He loves aspects of her. He loves her beauty, and that she comes from a great family, and he loves that she will pass these things along to their children, should they ever have any, said the witch on the end. But he doesn't love her. He doesn't know her. He doesn't see her greatness, her intelligence, her talent, said the witch to his left, her eyes bulging from her blackened eye sockets fearfully. She doesn't see him clearly. She only sees there is love in which is displaced. She doesn't see that he loves how her virtues will reflect upon him, said the witch farthest away from him. I could say the same about you, ladies. I don't think you see the prince clearly, he said, as the footmen started gathering the last of the dessert plates. Gaston hoped this was the final course, and he would soon be released from his torture. He had read about the different circles of the underworld, each of them being worse than the other, and decided being stuck with the Odd Sisters would be the most unendurable fate imaginable. Perhaps, but would it really work in your favor if we approved of him? Shouldn't you be focusing your efforts on taking your friend out of this marriage? Said the witch to his left. And before he could answer the infernal woman's question, they just started chattering away at him again. Your wish has come true at last, Gaston. It looks as though you will be released from our company. Behold." The witch on the left gestured to Lumiere, who stood at the front of the room, preparing to make his announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, to join the Queen at the drawing room, while the gentlemen partake of port and cigars here," he said with a flourish of his hands. Gaston and all the gentlemen stood up with the ladies, waiting until they were all out of the room before taking their seats again. Gaston noticed the men clustering near the king and prince rather than going back to their original seats, so Gaston decided he would do the same. But by the time he got there, the prince stood up again. "Excuse me, fine gentlemen, but I fear I must leave you to your port and cigars. I cannot be away from my dearest Circe. I trust the company of the king will be more than satisfactory." He looked at Gaston for the first time since they first saw each other before dinner. Gaston had always been able to read Kingsley, but he couldn't make out the look on his face in that moment. Was it sadness? He wasn't sure. He went to stand so he could follow his friend, wondering if maybe he wasn't trying to signal for him to take his leave so they could finally talk. But the king stopped him. "No, my boy. Stay here with us. I dare say you have been too much in the company of chattering women. Stay, and have a drink with us," said the king, laughing. "Perhaps you're right, your majesty," said Gaston, joining in the laughter. The last thing Gaston wanted was being cornered by Circe's odd sisters in the drawing room. If he was going to plot with those fiendish witches, he didn't need Circe catching on. There was nothing he could do about having to talk with them at dinner. But if he were seen speaking with them in the drawing room as well, Circe would be sure to know they were up to something. He could only hope they wouldn't pursue him in the ballroom. After drinks in the dining room, the men joined the ladies in the drawing room briefly before Lumiere swung open the French doors that led to the garden and beckoned dramatically for the party to gather on the terrace. Below, they saw a multitude of open carriages crossing the stone bridge. It was time for their intimate gathering to be turned into a gala affair, with lords, ladies, kings, and queens from various lands, some far and some near, all there to celebrate the prince's engagement, and to see the woman he was to marry. Circe and the prince stood closest to the terrace railing, waving to all their guests as fireworks exploded in the sky overhead. "Come, let's welcome our guests," said the queen, taking the king's arm and motioning for Circe and the prince to follow them. Lumiere led all of them to the ballroom. It was glowing with candles, sparkling from the chandelier and wall sconces. Gaston had never truly looked at this room before. He ran through it many times as a child, but he never really saw it. It was a vast marble room, lined with marble pillars that were accented with gold and draped with red silk, bunted that matched the prince's frock coat. The ceiling was magnificent, painted to look like a celestial dreamscape, the chandelier hanging in its center. To the left was an orchestra near the piano, and to the right was a dais with thrones for the royal family to sit upon. And around the perimeter of the room were small round tables with chairs for guests to take the repose upon between dances. But what Gaston loved most was the wall of windows and French doors that looked out across the entire kingdom, with a breathtaking view of the night sky, still sparking with fireworks. The royal family took their seats on their thrones to await the arrival of their guests while the fireworks created bursts of colors in the ballroom. Gaston and the others who had joined the family for dinner took seats at tables closest to the royal family, while Mr. Cogsworth stood at the entrance announcing the guests as they arrived, all of them paying their respects to the royal family and congratulating Prince and Circe on their engagement. Once everyone was assembled, Cogsworth gave a cue to Lumiere, who rang a small brass bell he produced from his pocket. A legion of footmen entered, rolling a cart with an enormous cake. It was constructed to look like the castle itself, with little marzipan figures of the royal family. It was intricately decorated down to every detail, including the gardens, which even had little woodland creatures. Everyone gasped as the cake rolled into the room. It was a thing of art. Moments later, more footmen marched into the room with large trays of champagne they handed to all the guests. Once everyone had a glass in their hand, Lumiere had another announcement. And now the king would like to make a toast to the happy couple. The king and queen stood from their thrones and smiled at their guests. The queen looked stunning in her red velvet gown, embroidered with delicate lace and fine beadwork that cascaded from her bodice down the length of her voluminous skirt. The king was also wearing red, a red velvet frock coat with black epaulettes and gold buttons with black trousers. They were an impressive pair, imperious and majestic, and so happy to be celebrating their son's engagement. It is my and Her Majesty's honor to welcome you all here, and to lay our blessings on the heads of our son and his betrothed, and wish them great joy in their forthcoming marriage. Let us raise our glasses to the future king and queen. To their happiness, said the queen, and everyone following suit. And with that, I declare the ball officially open. Cogsworth and the footmen whisked the cake to a corner of the room, near trestle tables laden with refreshments, as the prince and Circe stood and made their way to the center of the ballroom. The orchestra started to play. None of this felt real to Gaston, and just for a moment he was swept up in the pageantry, dizzied by the glamour and beauty of the evening. The prince wore a red-fitted frock coat, not unlike Gaston's, but trimmed in gold. His long auburn hair hung to his shoulders, and his blue eyes flashed with joy when he reached his hand out to Circe. Circe wore a silver dress with a tight bodice and full skirt, embroidered with small sparkling beads that glistened in the candlelight. The couple looked enraptured with each other as the prince put one hand around her waist and took her hand in his other, and they glided to the music that swelled around them. Everyone in the room clapped as the couple danced, spinning in circles and laughing, and soon other couples joined in circling around them. Gaston sat at a small table alone, watching his friend dance. It felt like he was in some sort of dream as the other dancers floated around them. The ladies' dress looked like blossoming flowers, reminding him of the conversation he had with Circe in the rose garden. His heart ached to see them dancing together so happily. Was he ready to ruin his friend's chance for true happiness? Circe is ready to ruin yours, said a voice that made his skin crawl. When Gaston looked up, he saw Circe's strange sisters looming over him. He quickly stood and smiled weakly, hoping they weren't looking for a dance partner. May we have this dance? Said the sister in the middle, and Gaston's stomach dropped. Was there no end to this humiliation this evening? First at dinner, and now in the ballroom. Was he never to be free of these women? It was too much. Not a word from Kingsley all evening, and now this? Dancing. How could I possibly pick which ravishing enchantress to dance with first? He asked, rolling his eyes. He looked pleadingly at Francis, who was standing at the trestle tables handing out cake and champagne to the guests. You may have the honor of dancing with Lucinda first. She is the oldest. She should have the first dance, said two of the sisters, urging Gaston and Lucinda toward the other dancers. To his relief, Gaston saw Francis running in their direction with a slice of cake wobbling on a plate as he rushed over to them. Gaston, here is that cake you wanted, Francis said with a wink. Cake? You're serving the cake? Asked the two pushy sisters in unison, grabbing Lucinda by the arm. I'm sorry, Gaston. I know you're heartbroken, but we can't dance now. It's time for cake. With that, they dragged Lucinda off, skittering their way toward the cake table. "Thank you, Francis. You saved me. Who knew witches liked cake so much?" said Gaston, watching the witches push the other guests out of their way who were standing at the cake table. "Witches, sir?" asked Francis, looking on in horror as two of the sisters grabbed fistfuls of cake and shoved them into their mouths, while Lucinda was biting the head of a marzipan prince. "Figure of speech, but they are odious women. Just look at them." Gaston rubbed his head in frustration. "It's not my place to have an opinion," said Francis, looking as though he dreaded going back to his duties. "Not while you're upstairs anyway," said Gaston, making Francis laugh. "I'm sorry you're having such a miserable time, Gaston, but if it's my consolation, you really are the most handsome man here," said Francis, making Gaston smile. Just then Cogsworth appeared. "Francis, the refreshment table is being woefully neglected. Please return to your post," he said, with his hands on his hips. Francis stood there for a few moments, as if to muster enough strength to return to his post. He sighed deeply before turning to leave as the witches popped marzipan animals into each other's mouths and cackling. "It's my fault, Mr. Cogsworth. I kept him talking," Gaston said, shooting Francis an apologetic smile. "You can hardly blame him. Look at the mess Circe's sisters are making." "Is there anything else you need, sir?" asked Mr. Cogsworth, stiff as ever. "No, Mr. Cogsworth. You've been very kind," he said rather sarcastically. To Gaston's relief, Circe's sisters were distracted for most of the evening by the cake. It was an unlikely distraction, but then again, they were exceedingly odd. It was strange how no one seemed to notice their antics, munching handfuls of cake, shooting daggers at the prince, whispering behind their fans, and laughing uncontrollably. At one point, they seemed to be having a contest to see who could eat the most cake. No one paid them the slightest bit of attention. It was as if there was an unspoken understanding to ignore them. So that is what Gaston decided to do as well. What he couldn't ignore was how happy Kingsley seemed as he danced with his duplicitous witch of a fiancé. At first, Gaston wondered if it was right to ruin the life his friend might have with this woman he seemed to love so well. But as the evening wore on, Gaston became angry and bitter. Circe was trying to send him away from his best friend, the only family and home he knew, all because of some vision that she didn't even fully understand. He felt sick watching her dance with the prince, hiding behind her smile. It was all fakery, all smoke and mirrors. She was a pretender, plotting to rid herself of her competition. She had said so herself. The prince loved no one more than he loved Gaston. As he sat there brooding, wondering if he was right, wondering if this was all a charade, he caught sight of Kingsley and the prince standing alone near the tall paned windows, looking out at the view. It was the first time all night Circe hadn't been at his side. She was talking with the king and queen, likely charming them just as she beguiled everyone that evening with her seeming sweetness and grace. This was his chance. He got up from his table and slowly made his way across the ballroom. He had no idea what he was going to say. That didn't matter. He was going to be reunited with his friend at last. He rounded the room, taking care to avoid Circe and the royal family for fear Circe would intervene. Just as he was about to approach, Kingsley turned around, as if he knew Gaston was behind him, and smiled to see his friend standing there. But Kingsley's expression quickly turned to horror. Gaston didn't understand. Why was he looking at him like this? Had Circe been weaving her web of lies all evening, whispering in his ear? Was his friend ensnared in her trap already? Was it too late for Gaston and Kingsley to have the life they dreamed of? Gaston felt his heart breaking, not understanding why his friend was looking at him like this, and even more confused when his horror turned to laughter. Gaston stood there silent and hurt, wondering why Kingsley the prince was laughing at him. Did he look like a fool after all? Were his thoughts so easily read upon his face? But then he understood. The prince wasn't looking at him. He was looking behind him at the odd sisters running toward Gaston, their hands, faces, and dresses covered with frosting. "Gaston! Gaston!" they screeched as they skittered closer, their faces full of expectation. "Oh, Gaston, it is time for our dance!" Gaston faced many beasts over the years, but the fear he felt as the odd sisters scrambled in his direction filled him with loathing. "You promised us a dance," they said, cackling with like the witches they were. "I did no such thing," Gaston protested. "Perhaps you would like to go to your rooms and freshen up." He couldn't understand why no one there seemed to notice what a spectacle they were making of themselves. "That is Circe's doing. She's enchanted us. We could scream the castle down and no one would notice or remember. No one of any consequence, anyway," said the witch he was sure was Lucinda. "I see." But before Gaston could finish his thought, he saw the prince being swept through the doors onto the terrace by Circe and his family. "What's going on?" He looked around to see everyone following the royal family. "The candlestick made an announcement," said one of the witches. "Candlestick?" he asked, confused. What was she talking about? "Candelabra, not candlestick, you fool. And he's not one yet," said one of the other witches. "What are you going on about now? This is just too perfect. I'm in league with the addle-brained witches who think the candlesticks make announcements. Next thing you'll see is dancing dishes. Perhaps we will one day, but it's not you who will see it," the witches screeched with laughter. "Shh! Ruby, don't give away all our secrets. Can you please behave normally and stop talking your gibberish just for one moment?" He'd had enough. He wasn't going to suffer their insanity for one moment more. It was bad enough when they were needling and teasing him, but now they were just spouting pure nonsense. He followed the other guests onto the terrace, leaving the cake-stained witches behind to fight about dancing cutlery. When he got into the terrace, he saw why everyone was there. The queen's pavilion was sparkling like a jewel in the distance, casting dancing lights upon the castle and its grounds. His heart hurt seeing how much Kingsley loved Circe. He felt defeated and alone, not sure what to do. Should he give up and let Circe drive him away, or try to live his life as he wanted? He wouldn't decide just now. He would sleep and try to think about it more clearly in the morning. He would slip out while everyone was watching the lights. It was too painful seeing the pavilion lit up. Too vivid were the memories of the days when everything began to crumble, changing his life forever. The lights looked like dancing ghosts, flickering and moving with the breeze. Gaston was overcome by his own ghosts, the mother he never knew, the father he missed with all of his heart, and most of all, the life he and Kingsley imagined for themselves when they were young.